Hey everyone, and in this episode we have the usual mix of good and bad news. We've got first KDE dropping X11 much sooner than expected in early 2027. We've got a brand new Office suite for Linux but also Mac and Windows. We've got the Arduino platform going down the drain after Qualcomm changed the terms of service, and we've got plenty of very encouraging developments for Linux, for drivers, and a bunch of other stuff, including the segue to our sponsor, Proton Pass. You probably already have heard about Proton Mail and Proton VPN. I cover them regularly in these sponsored segments, but you might not know about Proton Pass. This is their password manager, and it's actually also the one I use because it comes standard in your free Proton account. So not only can you store your logins and associated passwords, but you can also store two-factor authentication elements in there. There's an authenticator built in. You can share those passwords securely with other people. You can even have a little vault where you can store important documents alongside your passwords. It can monitor for breaches and passwords being shared on the dark web. It supports passkeys. It just does everything you expect from a password manager. Of course, Proton Pass's basic features are free, but if you want more stuff, they are currently running a Black Friday deal which will net you up to 60% off for a 12-month subscription to Proton Pass Plus, or a 50% off subscription if you go Proton Unlimited, which basically gives you the premium versions of all Proton's product. That's the subscription that I currently have. Super happy about it. I can only recommend Proton as a whole. The link, as usual, is down in the description. Okay, so there we go. KDE announced that they will not support X11 until the release of Plasma 7 as initially planned, but instead they will drop X11 starting with Plasma 6.8, which is planned for early 2027. So at that point, X11 will simply no longer be a thing if you want to use KDE as your desktop. They're not giving a specific date, but that's the approximative deadline. They say the vast majority of their users use Wayland anyway. They probably have this information through the KDE optional telemetry. They also say it's the default on most distributions, and they also say it will help them bring better optimization, more features, and faster development speeds, because obviously if you don't have to cater to an older legacy codebase that is virtually impossible to maintain or evolve, then you can move a bit faster. They also say LTS distros will probably stick to earlier versions of Plasma for longer, so if you don't want to move to 6.8 and you want to keep using X11, you'll be able to do so. If you go, for example, with Ubuntu 26.04 LTS, you're gonna have probably something like Plasma 6.6 for 10 or 13 years, which should give you enough leeway to wait until the thing that's missing from Wayland for you is fixed. Also important to note, X11 support is not going away from actual KDE applications. It's just the Plasma desktop itself that will stop supporting it, so you can still run all the KDE apps on other desktops that are running with X11 if you want. Now, they do acknowledge some issues remaining with Wayland, like accessibility. The basics work as expected, but third-party applications will probably have to adjust. Automation is also a bit less powerful than on X11, although they do list a few Wayland-specific tools that can help. And of course, there are the remaining significant issues, which they say some are very close to being fixed, but some of them might not be fixed for 6.8. The issue including window position save and restore, session restore, per app keyboard layouts, headless remote desktop, and global menu support. For BSD support, which is also often a contention point in terms of Wayland transitions, FreeBSD apparently already ships a full Wayland session, so that's not gonna be an issue, because it proves it is doable. Now, this is happening sooner than I was expecting. I honestly, personally at least, don't care. I already run KDE Plasma on Wayland. I have not touched an X11 session in years at that point because I just don't need it. X-Wayland works for me. But of course, out of all those remaining issues, some of them are really blockers for a lot of people. So if at least window position restore and window and session restore could be implemented, that would be pretty cool. The global menu as well is kind of an important feature for a lot of people. Would be nice if it worked, and we'll see where it goes from there. But that means that both GNOME and KDE in 2027 at least will no longer have an X11 session, and that's probably the end for this display server at that point, because that's the two major desktops just abandoning it entirely. Which also means that no major distro developer will ever touch X11 again, probably because they won't have to fix or implement something for the distro and the desktop that they ship, so that's going to put a huge dent in anything related to X11 anyway. Now this week there also was a brand new Office suite being released. It's not exactly new, it's Collabora Office, which already existed, but it's been fully revamped with a brand new UI and a brand new UX, and now it runs on the desktop instead of being a cloud-hosted solution only. It is based on LibreOffice, but the UI itself is brand new. And to be honest, I wouldn't have recognized LibreOffice in there at all from the screenshots. You get the usual format support for all of Microsoft's formats and for Open Document. It is fully open source, it works fully offline, although you can connect it to cloud storage solutions to access some files. It doesn't depend on Java like LibreOffice does. The new UI is made with JavaScript and CSS instead of the older VCL toolkit of LibreOffice. It also uses WebGL for rendering, and so the end result is that it's a bit smaller, it's a bit faster to install, simpler to use, and I would assume a bit faster in use as well. It doesn't have all the features and all the options of LibreOffice yet. It is voluntarily streamlined a bit. It doesn't let you create macros, only run them. There is no database editor in there, and it is only available as a Flatpak file. It's not yet on FlatHub or other remotes at the time I'm recording this. It's just the first version. Now, I tried to run it on my laptop, but the Flatpak just doesn't open. It crashes with an image EGL error. I tried reinstalling it. It just doesn't run on my computer, maybe an NVIDIA related stuff. I don't know, sometimes this happens. Hopefully, if you manage to try it, you'll be able to let me know down in the comments if it's a good option, if it's too simple, if it's not simple enough, if the performance problems that LibreOffice can exhibit are still there. Personally, I tend to use LibreOffice and or only Office, depending on the thing, but LibreOffice's interface kinda sucks, even in tabbed mode, and OnlyOffice is sometimes too simple and has memory leaks in most of its components, which mean that I have to close documents and reopen them quite often, which is annoying. So maybe this fixes that if I can manage to run it. Now, in another example of cool project gets bought by company and then is turned to crap, it looks like the Arduino platform is being victim of its success. Qualcomm bought Arduino in October this year, and wouldn't you know it, they just rewrote the term of service and the privacy policy, which now grant Qualcomm a full license over anything that users create and upload, plus some patent infringement protection against users, using also all user data for Qualcomm's purpose, and also fully monitoring all AI features that people implement or use to collect data. As it's been put by a prominent community member, this is turning Arduino into a corporate-controlled service with data extraction built in, and this also prevents users from reverse engineering anything or from understanding how things work, which was the very point of those small single-board computers. It was to let users create new things based on small boards and open code, and to learn how stuff actually works. Qualcomm also has the rights to license any content however they want, so if you created this and distribute it through Arduino's platform, Qualcomm can make profit off of it, and they basically own it. I personally never really took an interest in single-board computers. I dabbled with a Jetson Nano, but I just don't really have time to dedicate to those projects. But I always loved the fact that this brought learning and curiosity back into computing, instead of just using a computer without understanding what an OS is, what it does, what it collects, how it works, how it uses your hardware, what a driver is. You actually learn to make all that stuff and make it run and how it interacts with each other. And I think that's how people should approach computing. It's too important to just gloss over and just use the visual interface, and so I love those projects for that. Unfortunately, they're being killed off by companies, as always. Now, it looks like Google's merging of Chrome OS and Android will not actually be a merge, more like a sort of fork of Android to build a desktop OS, and that desktop OS will be called AluminiumOS, or maybe it's AIuminiumOS. They posted a job offer for a product manager for that new, let's call it Aluminium Android-based operating system, which has to be that convergence of the two Google systems, but it's not a merger, it is an Android-based thing. Now, of course, this won't just be Android with a desktop mode. They say Aluminium will be built with AI at its core, with Gemini everywhere, basically. Just like Windows is turning into an agentic OS, probably Aluminium will let you spawn little agents everywhere to do stuff in your stead. The job listing also seems to indicate that they will have a portfolio of devices from all form factors. They cite laptops, detachables, tablets, and boxes, and they also mention tiers, as in probably a classification of the performance of all of that future hardware. This likely means that they will have a partner program for other manufacturers to build stuff that runs this OS, probably. Finally, that listing also mentions transitioning Google from Chrome OS to AluminiumOS, so that's the final confirmation that Chrome OS is indeed going away, and I don't think it will be missed by many people because it was a terrible system. Of course, I have no plans to ever use a desktop operating system made by Google because I don't want them grabbing literally everything that I do to feed their AI. What interested me is the fact that maybe Android and Chrome OS would merge, meaning that Android on smartphones would have all the capabilities that we've seen to run a Linux terminal, to run Linux applications straight on the phone. But if those are two separate OSs, maybe Android will just stick with being Android and AluminiumOS will be the one running actual Linux apps, meaning my dream of having any smartphone and then installing the Linux terminal and virtual machine and then running Plasma Mobile or Phosh and Linux apps on top of a regular Android system, that dream is probably dead, and that sucks because that was the only way I was ever going back to Android. Now, Igalia, a free software consultancy firm, worked with Valve to make the Steam Machine and the Steam Frame a reality, and they posted some details on what they actually did to help with those projects. So the first thing is FEX, the x86 to ARM emulator that powers the Steam Frame. They call it a translation layer, but it is kind of just emulation, and they say it was a dream come true to work on that thing, although it was a lot of manual QA work. They also created the Mesa Turnip driver that allows the Qualcomm Arduino GPU in the frame to use Vulkan properly and to actually render games. They say they managed to achieve higher Vulkan correctness than the proprietary driver for that hardware, and they also say that they're faster in many cases than that proprietary driver. Igalia also contributed code to the Mesa NIR shader compiler, to RADV and V3DV, all things used by other projects and other hardware, so their work is not just benefiting Valve's products. Igalia also congratulated Valve on using free and open source software to power all of this, and they say that their work will also help older generations of Snapdragon hardware, not just the one that is in the Steam Frame, which is a Snapdragon Gen 3 CPU. As per other projects, they're working on a gaming-specific scheduler called LADV for Latency-Aware Virtual Deadline Scheduler, which should deliver better performance for games when on battery while using less energy. This should help all laptops, handhelds, and of course the Steam Frame as well, because it is a full computer running on battery if you want it to. Finally, Igalia also worked on AMD kernel drivers to improve HDR support for the Steam Deck and the Steam Machine. A lot of really cool work, mostly funded by Valve. They generally do this, they contract out some improvements to one of those consultancy firms, which ends up generally doing some absolutely excellent work that benefits everyone alongside it. So that's cool. Now, on other news though, the Steam Machine is apparently not going to be sponsored by Valve, subsidized by Valve, meaning it's probably not going to cost $500, it's probably more along the lines of $800 to $1,000, which means its success will very likely be much more limited than the Steam Deck was successful. Now we have some pretty bad news for ARM laptops on Linux, or at least those based on the Snapdragon X1 system on a chip, because Tuxedo, the Linux hardware manufacturer that very regularly sponsors this channel, they were working on their own prototype on this, but it turns out this is really difficult to support. They even decided to abandon their plans to sell such a device based on the Snapdragon X1 chip, and this probably means that no laptop based on this chip will really support Linux in any form of timely manner. The main issue seems to be that development is actually very difficult, the architecture is quite uncommon, the BIOS can't quite be updated from Linux, fan control doesn't seem to work properly either, virtualization isn't really something they could do, at least on the model they were trying to implement, USB 4 speeds didn't work, and video hardware decoding could be done using the integrated GPU of that system, but most applications on Linux do not support the way it could be done, so it's probably not working either. On top of that, apparently battery life just was not good enough to warrant all these drawbacks. They say the main argument for using ARM is longer battery life, and on Linux those gains just did not materialize in their testing. So they decided to drop their plans to offer a device based on the Snapdragon X1, because investing more resources would just not be worth it, especially since the X2 system on a chip has already been announced and will be widely available probably in early 2026, before they could even fix all the problems of their X1 laptop, meaning when they were ready to sell it, there would already have been more powerful devices on the market at a lower price potentially. Now that's really a shame. At the beginning it seemed like Qualcomm was actually contributing to the Linux kernel to help support this platform, but it turns out this just was not enough and there was just too much work to do. And this is a worrying trend, because with Apple's ARM chips and now Qualcomm's ARM chips, we're seeing that support is actually really difficult on Linux for these platforms, which is annoying, because if at some point the consumer market turns and pivots towards those ARM devices, we might just be left in the dust, because companies making those things just do not think about Linux support at all. Those are not architectures that they're using in data centers right now, and so they don't think about Linux when they think about those devices, and they just don't contribute all that much to Linux for that support. Hopefully this can be fixed, but yeah, Tuxedo is just not a giant hardware manufacturer. Investing more and more resources into something that would just never sell anyway is probably not a good idea. Still on Tuxedo though, they're working on improving how they upstream their drivers and various other support bits into the Linux kernel. Their ARM efforts might have stalled, but they're still working on x86 and supporting all the features that they have in the laptops that they sell. There have been issues in the past in regards to pushing that work to the kernel, and so they're addressing that. So they have now posted patches to support a brand new laptop built by the Uniwheel original design manufacturer, and these patches make Wi-Fi radio work, performance mode toggle work. It also adds support for the keys to mute the audio, they manage the keyboard backlight level, they can turn on and off the webcam, they can send charging events to the system, basically all the little things related to the keyboard, and some ease of use and quality of life stuff. On top of that, they're pushing patches to support most of their laptops directly in the upstream kernel, including the Infinity Book Pro Gen 6 and 7, which is what I use personally, but also a ton of others from their Stellaris, Polaris, Pulse, and Omnia book series. Most of their laptops would see drivers upstreamed with these patches, which is really nice because it means that you no longer have to add their repos or people who compiled packages from their open source code to your distro. You can just install any distro and all the support is right there. You don't have to add anything. They're also adding custom total graphics power management for laptops using NVIDIA RTX 30 series and newer, so they can let the dedicated GPU access more power while reducing what the CPU has access to in cases where the GPU is the bottleneck. That's really nice. Tuxedo devices did support any Linux distro, but if you wanted light bar support, certain keyboard keys to work, controlling the color of the keyboard backlight, stuff like that, it often required you to add either their repos or to find a third-party repo that compiled their code, because it was all open source work, into packages. For example, for Fedora or any Arch-based distros, you had their stuff on the AUR or in a Copper repo. Having that built into the kernel makes all of this way easier. You will still probably need those repos if you use a distro that isn't always up to date in terms of the kernel it ships, but at least if you use that, you will be good to go every time you buy one of their devices. No need to add anything on top of that. You have support for all the features of the device, and that's pretty good. Now, Valve's work on color management seems to be ready to be upstreamed. The Color Pipeline API is something they've been working on for a while in collaboration with AMD, Igalia, Valve, and a bunch of others, and it's one of the important tools we need to improve HDR support on Linux. This work is now merged. Now, it is mostly work on the AMD GPU driver, obviously, because Valve wants this to be supported on the Steam Deck and the Steam machine, but also it will benefit everyone else because they worked on the entire API, which will be made available for everyone. They just have to support it in their own graphics driver. So, for example, NVIDIA would have to add support for that API in the NVIDIA drivers. This should be included in the kernel 6.20, or maybe it's going to be the kernel 7.0, there's some debate about that, and in basic terms, this should allow for mixing HDR, SDR, different color profiles, and different color gamuts on screen. It should also help with having better color accuracy on Linux, of course, and also it would support a bunch of display devices with all these features. This might seem like not much, but it's the kind of stuff that enables applications made for professional work to look at Linux as a serious option, because you have all the backends and all the features that you might want to provide a professional experience for your customers. Once you have all of that support, maybe we're a more attractive platform, or at least combined with everything else happening on Linux, this does make it a more attractive platform for third-party app developers, and that's good. Now, since this is the end of this episode, we're gonna have a little laugh at the expense of Microsoft because they admitted over the weekend that their updates broke Windows for a ton of their users, as in, it breaks many core parts of the OS and the entire Windows shell. A bunch of users reported to NVIDIA a few weeks back that there were issues linked to the latest Windows updates, and NVIDIA investigated, and it turns out this is a Microsoft issue. The company, Microsoft, they even acknowledged that they have problems. They published a support article that outlines all the major issues on Windows that are currently present in the latest update, and they seem to affect the start menu, the taskbar, the file explorer, the shell, and the settings. So basically everything people rely upon daily. Now, just because Microsoft is now acknowledging the problem doesn't mean that it is a new thing, though. Some of these issues date back from July and still haven't been fixed. Issues include crashes for the whole shell, crashes for the file explorer, problems in the start menu in displaying elements, system settings just never opening, applications crashing when they initialize their XAML views, Explorer starting but never having a taskbar entry, the Windows shell starting without a taskbar, and more. Microsoft even gave users a bunch of fixes to try and solve the problems, and those fixes are command lines, which is hilarious as a Linux user because Linux is often criticized for requiring the command line to fix problems, but now it's also the case for Windows, and it's not to fix small usability problems, it's to fix your entire desktop crashing over and over again. Basically, Windows 11 is, as usual, a shit show. No one likes this thing, no one wants to use it, but you just don't have a choice if you want to stick to Windows, because Windows 10 has less than a year left in it, and after that, if you don't go Windows, then you have to move to something else. Hopefully, this actually brings more people to Linux, because that would be pretty cool. If you're tired of using that piece of garbage that Windows 11 is, we have plenty of way more stable, way better looking, and way more featureful operating systems that also don't gobble up your data or show ads on your screen. Now, if you do need a new computer and you want to move to Linux, why not just check out our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers, because they provide just that. If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you have heard about Tuxedo. They make laptops or desktops, or both actually, that ship with Linux pre-installed. They are really, really solid. They have options for everyone in terms of price points, in terms of performance, in terms of keyboard layouts, and I personally only rely on their devices these days. Everything you see from me or hear from me is made on a Tuxedo laptop running Tuxedo OS, and all the gaming I do is done on one of their desktops, the Tuxedo Cube running Nobara. Those are fantastic devices. They've been sponsoring the channel for more than 3 years now. They're really reliable, and honestly, I can only recommend them. So the link is down in the description as always. Anyway, thank you all for watching this video or listening to it or just enjoying whatever you were doing while this was playing in the background. Who cares? You know where all the YouTube buttons are. Please do click all of those to make sure that the channel keeps growing a little bit, because times are rough on YouTube these days. And also there are plenty of links down in the description to learn more about any of these topics or to support this show. Thank you all for listening or watching or whatever, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!